Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont. This is my review of Cyberpunk 2077, a video I debated making because what can I say at this point that hasn't been said 1,000 times? Still, I do think it's a very interesting game to review, so here we are. Disclaimer, this is not a sponsored review. I bought Cyberpunk with my own money, and then I refunded it, although it took more than a month to get my refund processed, which I assume is because they were very busy with customer support, handling refunds and all that. Oh, with that out of the way, let's get to it, shall we? Aside from being the first game I've refunded in I don't know how many years, Cyberpunk is an open world FPS, coming to us from the developers of The Witcher 3, game I very much enjoy, despite some of its shortcomings. See my review on that if you're interested. Cyberpunk was announced 8 some years ago, finally released back in December. That was the first mistake. You're probably well aware of that, but Cyberpunk was in no way fit to release at launch. Dozens and dozens of videos showing all manner of performance issues, crazy glitches, and so on. So I'll not dwell on those too much. The developers brushed some of these complaints aside, and they eventually admitted that the console version wasn't good enough, while seeming to imply the PC version was. It isn't, not by a long shot. The PC version also performs poorly and the visuals were really inconsistent. Mouse and keyboard controls didn't feel good, aiming with a gamepad felt awful. Best of both worlds would have been to play with a gamepad, then use a mouse for combat for aiming. But in the end, I just settled for mouse and keyboard, for the sake of simplicity. There's quite a few options available, but none of that really matters because the game's scaling from very low to very high seems redundant. I could get wildly inconsistent performance no matter what I did. Sometimes I would get 50 FPS with everything maxed out. Other times I would get 30 FPS with everything set to like minimum. No matter what I did, I just couldn't get the game to run consistently. Eventually I just put everything like as low as it would go, anything to get a smoother frame rate. The main problem with having all these performance issues and game-breaking glitches would be immersion. That is what I consider the #1 problem with Cyberpunk: immersion. See, the city and the world they've created for this game could be incredibly immersive. Night City is large and extremely detailed. Everywhere you look there are posters, advertisements, buildings and details, all interesting to look at. A really vertical city that can almost give you the sense of vertigo you might have experienced in real life. I grew up in a town with no tall buildings. Even London wasn't really full of skyscrapers. So when I went to LA for the first time when I was about 10, the feeling of being surrounded by these huge man-made towers that blocked out the sky somewhat, it was a really new and strange sensation. Night City manages to provide a virtual version of that, if you will. The feeling of being in this huge concrete jungle, they managed that. On top of that, the story is relatively interesting too once it gets going. And yet, anytime I started to get immersed in the game, something would ruin it. Perhaps I'm overlooking some crime, I decide to step in. In the process, I step off the curb, literally a foot high, and then suddenly accelerate into the floor at 500 miles per hour and die. Perhaps I'm in the middle of an important story mission. The character I'm talking to stops moving their mouth and just stares at me blankly whilst words come out. Maybe I'm at the beginning of a story mission and a character starts to cross the road and is hit by a truck, only instead of the truck hitting him, it just phases through his body. Maybe it's enemies running around the sky above me before T-posing majestically. All of these issues hurt immersion, obviously, but none of them are exactly intentional. They're problems, they're glitches that can be patched out. The bigger issue would be the developers insisting on keeping more than 90% of the game, outside of a few very rare cutscenes, in first-person view. You might be thinking, first-person makes it more immersive. At first glance, that would seem the obvious solution. If you said, what is the most immersive camera angle for a game? You go, oh, first person, surely. But it is not so. When your game's story is told from a first person angle, you are severely limited in what you can do. Dialogue sequences, action scenes, everything. It's all constrained into a very small scope as our player stares at things, or maybe just looks at the floor whilst important things happen. I'm not saying entirely first-person storytelling can't work, but for a game like this, it did not work well at all. Not when so much of the story involves around our player character relating to them and their very personal struggles. On top of that, it makes some dialogue sequences extremely awkward to boot, with characters standing a foot away staring at you. Honestly, I think this game would have benefited a lot from cutscenes of a more traditional manner, such as The Witcher 3, which had some great cutscenes that made perfect use of framing, angles and such to achieve the desired emotion or result. There's a reason why not many movies are made in first-person view, but you can still be immersed in them. You know, there's a very good reason for that. The benefits of first-person are for firing guns, primarily, and not having to load a player model to save on, I guess, rendering budget. It would have helped in gameplay too. I'm sure I'm not the only person who would have liked to traverse the world in third person, even if I used first person for combat sequences. As for the story itself, well, it isn't superb. A lot of it stems from the player character not having much of a link to the player. Our only real motivation in the game is to, well, keep them alive, but why? We don't really know anything about our character, despite being an RPG in some aspects. We never get to flesh that out, compared with, say, I don't know, New Vegas, wherein we're given more freedom to shape our character's goals and backstory, if you will. Or even a game like Mass Effect, where we get to sympathize and grow into liking Shepard, and we have more of a motivation than just keep Shepard alive. In Cyberpunk, you can choose from 3 different life choices, but these effectively do nothing more than give you a 30-minute intro before you're funneled into the same spot, irrespective of your origin, which can be very stupid if you're the corpo one. You go from being a businessman to suddenly being like a low-level thug. Beyond that, you get some dialogue options here and there. Maybe a quest or 2 for each, but I'm not sure because I didn't play through the game 3 times. Speaking of which, dialogue in this game feels somewhat pointless. After I got my ending to the game, I read up on the dialogue choices and the gameplay choices. It turns out there's like 1 mission in the game where stuff can change, and that's the 1 mission they showed off in a demo, so of course they wanted to make it look better. I was reading up on it and almost nothing matters. Your choices are largely irrelevant outside of like 1 specific conversation in 1 mission near the end of the game. And yet, there are some interesting characters in the world. The story they're trying to tell could be interesting with a bit more work. I can see what they were going for. There's a lot of potential there, but that about sums up Cyberpunk, frankly. Missed potential. The developers remarked how they want this to be a Rockstar quality game. They didn't hit that in any imaginable way. Okay, maybe with the design of the world. As I mentioned earlier, the city is well designed. The writing is decent, the story is okay, the combat is serviceable. It's just the design of the world, the work of the artists, be they visual, audio, whatever, all seem pretty good. That's the only thing where they really got near to Rockstar level. The guns have a good amount of kick to them. I love the way they sound. The voice acting's decent. There's some good performances, and some they're a little more hit and miss. Keanu Reeves has a very distinct style, which makes him well suited to some roles, such as John Wick and Neo. Those play to his strengths. Others, not so much, like Dracula. I would argue that his somewhat stiff emoting is quite good for a character like Johnny Silverhand, who clearly has some issues. At the same time, I don't really get the feeling of a crazy rocker boy terrorist from him. There is a slight disconnect between how the character is portrayed and how he is supposed to be at times, I think. I feel like there isn't quite enough of that manic energy. I haven't really spoken much about the gameplay, have I? Well, I don't know what to say, honestly. Night City is full of 1,000 little icons on the map which you can go and check out. But I'll admit, I didn't really have the patience to do so. There was no way of knowing which icons were kill 5 guys who are there, and which might be an actually interesting side quest, which frustrated me as I had no compulsion to do the same thing 500 times in the hopes 1 might be interesting. The gunplay was fine. I didn't mess around with the melee and other things too much. Frankly, I didn't enjoy the melee and the swords too much because they were in first person, but they weren't terrible. There's a lot of upgrades and things you can do, like guns and your hacking interface, and like implants for your character. I got like 2 implants and I never changed my hacking interface. And speaking of interfaces, the user interface for buying implants, having invasive surgery, is identical to buying a new gun, which is kind of silly. Like, you go up to a guy, he brings you a list of things, you buy one, then you leave, and the implication is that he drilled you open and shoved stuff inside you. I had no real need or interest in the implants and stuff because, frankly, none of them were all that cool. A lot of them were just like stat boosts, like 5% more this or that. They were, there were some that were cool, like, double jump sort of things, but they should have all been like that. I abhor the game's loot design. Any room you enter in the game will have 500 items to pick up. You'll get dozens and dozens of guns. Why? Why not just have a set selection of guns, say 15 to 20 guns, have them unlock as the game goes on, maybe purchasing them, finding them in a story, a reward, then let us customize them. See, considering how much they want to be on the level of Rockstar, they didn't seem to take much inspiration from them in terms of game design, which is frustrating in some areas. We don't need, like, Borderlands-style millions of guns in this game. Now, even in a game like Neo, where I don't particularly enjoy having 2,000 katanas, at least there's more of a reason to it, and the loot works more in the end game of that game. In Cyberpunk, it's like, I can't see any reason for it to exist as a gameplay mechanic. Unfortunately, Cyberpunk didn't push the envelope in any way, nor did it really do anything particularly well, apart from the aforementioned map design. I know this sounds very negative. I didn't hate the game though. I don't think it's the worst game ever or whatever. Yes, I did refund it because I can't really justify paying for such a buggy product. I can't justify paying for something that's early access but marketed as a full release, If they had marketed it as early access, that would have been fine. I can see the potential in this game. There's a lot of it. It just feels like early access, and yes, that's why I asked for a refund. I didn't buy it with the agreement I'd be getting a buggy, early access title with huge glitches and problems and feeling unfinished. If the game had come out December 2021, perhaps it would have launched in an acceptable state. I don't know. I hope the developers will take their time and fix the game, then re-release it in the future or something. If they get it up to scratch, I'd love to buy it again and actually enjoy the experience and get immersed. The developers need to fix all the bugs and performance issues, then look at aspects of the game and ask themselves, why is this in the game? Is it fun, or does it add something? If not, scrap it. Scrap the pointless millions of guns every few seconds mechanic. Doesn't make sense, doesn't add anything fun to the game. The level of quality and polish here is unacceptable. CDPR, who previously enjoyed a lot of respect and admiration, have taken a serious hit to their reputation, built up over years and demolished overnight. Still, it's never too late to earn it back. Capcom managed it. If I had to put a score to the game right now, it would be a 3 or a 4 out of 10. If they fixed all of the performance issues and bugs, that would jump up to maybe a 7. So in summary, I know most of this review was very negative, but there is a good game here, somewhere. It's just so very frustrating how it all turned out. But well, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. If you're wondering, should I buy Cyberpunk? Not now. Buy it in 6 months, buy it in a year from now. Oh, and if you're wondering which ending I got, well, spoiler warning, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I got the Leave Night City with Panam option. That honestly seems like the only agreeable one to me. Night City, as interesting to look at as it is a disgusting place. I cannot fathom wanting to live there. Seems like a huge mistake. Anyway, time for watching. See you later.